Conversations with the Mind podcast, where we explore consciousness through conversations with interesting people. Our mission is to engage the collective mind piece by piece to bring greater clarity of mind to our listeners locally and across the planet, and to contribute to broaden the shared experiential knowledge and wisdom of existence. All right, folks, welcome back to Conversations with the Mind. I'm your host, Shane Lemaster, and today we're here for episode number 85 with very special guest, Del Jolly. What's up, man?
Hey, man, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate you reaching out and letting me spill my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my first introduction to you was through the Denver Psilocybin Policy Review Panel, which I'm a part of in Denver, and we had you in as a guest speaker representing Unlimited Sciences and talking about the potential of getting some psilocybin or other types of chemical type research going here in the Front Range in Denver. And I think that's such a huge thing, especially with the psychedelic renaissance or revolution or whatever you want to call it that's happening now. And I'm really stoked and proud to be alive right now, and also living in Colorado, where this seems to be like a growing hub for this kind of work, this kind of interest.
Yeah, it's wild, man. I mean, as you kind of get a little bit older, you see things change, and you get hopefully get a little bit wiser and see how far we've come in the last, realistically, 5 years, where I originally kind of started my plant medicine journey with Charlotte's Web. And, 5 years ago, I was kind of against marijuana, so the rapid change from going from being fairly against marijuana to supporting the Decriminalize Denver team and Kevin Matthews and that initiative, and then launching a psychedelic research nonprofit. You would have told me I was doing that 10 years ago. There's no way, no way at all. So, but Colorado tends to be kind of a really unique hub. I mean, it seems, decriminalize of marijuana, although California definitely kind of started that, it seems as though Colorado took a huge initiative to move that ball forward. So Colorado's cool, man.
Yeah, what do you think it is about Colorado? I mean, I've lived here since about 1990, so almost, 30 years. What do you think it is about Colorado, its people, its culture, its surroundings that bring about these types of open-minded conversations and policy change? Because there's only, there's small pockets here in the U.S. where this is really booming, and Colorado is one of them, Oregon being another, California in some areas being another. Madison, Wisconsin, out of other places, it's happening there. So what do you think it is about Colorado in particular that draws this kind of thing?
I don't know. I mean, part of me wants to credit just kind of that pioneering spirit, right? Of
exploration.
The West was won by us. My son's name is West, and I named him West because of the beauty of the mountains have never been lost on me when I look to the West, and being born here and constantly using that as a North Star, if you will, to navigate, which direction am I going? You always look to the mountains. But I always imagine pioneers driving up in a covered wagon, stopping in Denver, looking at those mountains, and then who's the son of a bitch who said, let's go over those mountains and see what's on the other side? That kind of spirit is what I really romanticize, and I think is very, very fascinating. And hopefully that's our ancestral lineage saying, let's pioneer some things, let's do things differently, let's forge a new path. And whether it's cannabis or psychedelics, I think it stems from that type of mentality. And a lot of that too maybe is coming from Colorado is a very healthy state. It's always ranked, top 5 healthiest cities, Colorado Springs or Denver or whatnot, because of all the hiking and the outdoor recreation that we have. I think people also want to take their health in their own hands, and they want to kind of get after it. And then when you have new information like the internet that emerges on the space not too long ago, people are saying, oh man, I didn't know I could, do that, or I couldn't do that. Yeah. Like I said before, my journey into this is very, very new. 5 years being kind of pro any of this, and it all stems from the idea of watching people take their health into their own hand and then kind of doing it myself as well. So kind of maybe health and pioneer and spirit might be the catalyst there.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's so true. Traveling, I've thought of that many times, like I don't think with my modern, body and things like that, I don't think I could make it through the mountains with a covered wagon, a whole family, losing family members along the way, like all that stuff. That is such a psychedelic journey in and of itself. I mean, you're traveling into the unknown over this insurmountable, what seems insurmountable, obstacle. And very much, a lot of my psychedelic experiences have felt just that way, right? You go into it and you're like, I'm going into the unknown. I'm going up this hill and I don't know what's on the other side, but I'm curious, and I want to go to the other side so that I can come back and tell people what it's like, or so I can just experience this new frontier that nobody else has really mapped yet. I really identify with that spirit.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I do a lot of elk hunting with a bow in every September, and there's always been something in me. Oh man, I'm gonna go over that ridge. I'm just gonna go over that ridge, and I get to the top of that ridge. I'm gonna go over that ridge, and then I'm gonna go over that ridge, and it's just kind of a nonstop thing for me because I just want to see. And yeah, psychedelics can very much be like that, where I want to explore the recesses of my mind and see what's in there to better understand myself, and then hopefully come out the other side a better, stronger person. Think about, how do you imagine a pioneer, or ancient times, even when people are just, who's the first person to see a grizzly bear, come up across a grizzly bear that even attacks? You don't know what this thing is. It's coming at you. That's a pretty wild thing. Or the idea of even seeing a bull elk. People do it all the time in Rocky Mountain National Park, right? You have these tourists taking pictures of elk bugling and end up getting thrashed or whatnot. But the idea of seeing these animals that you've never seen before, that's a way that you could kind of approach psychedelics. Is there's opportunity in your mind that, who knows? Who knows what's in there, man? And are you brave enough to go up over that ridge? And who knows? Maybe it's gold. Maybe it's a freaking grizzly bear,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
You said you're not from Colorado. You said you got here in 90. Where'd you come from?
Yeah, so I was born in Arizona, in Tucson. I only lived there for about a year and a half when I was a baby, and then we moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, right along the Sandias Mountains. So it was still like in a Front Range type area. We take lots of trips almost every weekend up to Santa Fe, Taos, and over to Angel Fire and Eagle's Nest, where my grandmother lived, like way up in the mountains of New Mexico, where it's more like the Colorado mountains up there, very green and lush. And then, we moved here in 1990, grew up in Loveland, Colorado, and ended up going to CU Boulder for my undergrad, then DU in Denver for some graduate work, then back up here to Fort Collins now for a PhD at CSU. So yeah, I can't seem to get away. I'm sure I'm going to be moving away from Colorado at some point. My wife and I have been considering northern Idaho or Canada maybe, but we're pretty set on staying close and tied to the mountains, just because, for practicality reasons, it offers so much recreation and so much teaching and learning opportunities for, our future kids and things like that, but also just the energy of the mountain, sort of that stoic, grounding presence. And yet it's this giant, moving, living creature that is shifting every single day right under our feet, and has the power to literally, move mountains. So we're always going to stay tied to that. But Colorado has been my home for a long time.
Yeah, Idaho. Everyone talks about Idaho, and then Idaho is a big thing that I've thought of, and Montana as well. Mm-hmm. Except for the fact that I don't know what it is, but this last year or two, I've been really kind of avoiding the cold, man. I have not liked the cold the last couple of years. It's been unique because I used to really enjoy it because, you know, things would be quiet and, you know, seems like things would die down quite a bit, you know, and something really primal about being bitter cold that I would enjoy. But anymore, man, it's tough to go outside when it's cold, but I need to change that, I guess.
Yeah. Or yeah, switch the mindset somewhere around the cold. Um,
Yeah.
So my only like really standard question that I ask on the show is usually the first one, but we were already getting into some stuff, which is fine. And that is, you know, that the podcast is called Conversations with the Mind. And so I'm wondering, when you hear that phrase, conversations with the mind, what resonates within you? What sort of meaning does that have for you? And what sort of maybe memories or visuals do you have that accompany that particular phrase, conversations with the mind?
Yeah, it's an interesting question to kind of contemplate because that's changed a lot in the last couple of years for me as far as even kind of considering what's going on upstairs in my mind. And it's only been very recently that I've gotten a little bit more intimate with my own idea of ego and duality and non-dual and all these kind of concepts that are very early stages for me. So when I think about it, I think of kind of contemplating the who am I, and how does that true self show up in my daily on the exterior out and you know, fighting my ego. And so having conversations about, you know, how am I showing up, what part of this expression or emotion that I'm having right now is true or the truth, or is it out of ego, you know? And so that's something that is very, very new to me, from kind of being a bit of a simpleton as far as how things operate. I just went with the flow and operated not consciously, not being conscious of how I operate and show up on the daily. So for me, that the concept of exploring my own mind and kind of traversing what's recently kind of come up through some psychedelic experiences is challenging at times, and still is, and always will be. And I've always said I never had a fear of death, and this is kind of an opposite for what you hear about psychedelics. I've never had a fear of death until I started doing psychedelics. You know, I had an experience, and it just kind of showed me the potential of humanity, of my own personal self, let alone every other person around me. And then these ideas and concepts started to creep into, like, man, we're just missing the point so tremendously, you know, that it made me afraid. Like, how do I recover lost time? How do I recover the 30 plus years I spent being mindless, and just going through the motion and not considering other people, myself, these types of things. So definitely something that I work with every day, as far as trying to think about, what is my mind thinking? How much of that is true? How much of that is ego? How much can I implement into my daily and show up for myself and for others? So
yeah, that self-exploration
is
is such a huge thing. And like you said, like, I think one of the most important aspects of exploring the inner world that is that we all have, is asking questions, right? Questioning yourself, right? And then that question you said, like, who am I? That's one of the biggest questions, right? And I feel like at any given moment, if I ask myself that question, who am I, I'm going to get a different answer, you know, and it's going to be rooted in something else, right? So I may ask myself, well, who am I? Well, I'm Shane, I'm a student, I'm a researcher, I'm a jiu-jitsu practitioner, I'm all these things, right? And that's me in this physical human realm. But you ask me when I've just got done meditating, who are you? And I might say, I'm nothingness, or, I'm one with everything, or, I'm, whatever. So, it's interesting that that question is, I think it's such an important one, and we all need to ask ourselves that, but also identifying that, the answer has many pathways, right, for who you are, and not any one of them in particular is the one, right? They're all a part of you, that you engage in different scenarios and different situations. And, I'll be my jiu-jitsu self on the mat, and I may be my jiu-jitsu self too on the street. If somebody comes up and starts, spouting profanities at me, that side of me might kick in, or maybe it'll be my spiritual self that shows up. But that's interesting that we kind of hold all of these aspects of self, including the ego, and they're all working together at once. For a long time in my own self-journeying, self-exploration, and particularly with my introduction to Buddhism, in the beginning, being the ignorant mind that I was, I thought that destroying the ego was the thing to do, right? It's this thing that is not necessarily real, but has so much control over some of our automatic behaviors and can be very self-destructive. And I was like, I got to smash the ego. But now, the more that I've worked with it, the ego has not gone away, and it's not going away. I've come to realize that it's not about getting rid of the ego altogether, but rather reestablishing a different relationship with ego, so the ego itself is not running the show, but it's just another, tool in your toolbox that you can pull out selectively when you need it. But it's not ruling your life, or that it's not suppressed altogether, right? Because the ego serves very practical purposes in everyday life too. It helps with a lot of things.
Yeah, it's absolutely a tool. It's a driver, right? I mean, it's a driver for a lot of things that are worldly. Here's a question for you then. You've got your ego and then you've got your highest self. What about, I almost feel like ego is even better than kind of what I feel a lot of people operate, just kind of like a zombie, where you're not either or. You're not like a driven, egotistic guy who's trying to make a ton of money and do this and do that, or where that's could lead to some productivity. And then you have the higher conscious who knows that all that's just kind of like an illusion. But then it seems like there's some people who just, I don't know, maybe based on past traumas or traumas for them, don't allow them to operate in any of that, and they're just moving through. They're just, what do you think that is? And how do you even come to this? Even the idea of consciousness, you ask that to a lot of folks, they're going to look at you side-eyed and say, what are you talking about, man?
Yeah.
Kind of a luxury concept.
Yeah. I think, when people ask me, I once thought that ego was my biggest enemy. And now, it's more of a feeling that, apathy is the biggest enemy, and that's what I think you're alluding to, is that, ego can be a great driver and a source of energy, that if guided in the right way can be very productive, but the opposite of that drive sort of is this apathetic state where, maybe we're using material bypassing or spiritual bypassing or whatever kind of bypassing we're doing, to disengage completely from the world, from experience. We don't have drive and motivation to pursue even the things we're the most passionate about, and we kind of check out of life. I definitely see that in a lot of people, and I think it stems from a lot of different things. So for some people, it's fear, right? The fear of reality. Reality is hard, right? Life is hard, and we don't want to fail. But from being a successful nonprofit person, that failure is a part of it's part of the journey. Most successful people have failed more times than unsuccessful people have even tried. And so sometimes it's fear that leads us into apathy. Sometimes you're right, it's trauma. where we might feel like no matter what I do to make my situation better, the other shoe's always going to drop. And so why even try? I've even seen people come back from, mind-blowing psychedelic experiences where they experience oneness and, supreme consciousness and their highest self. And then they come back and they're like, well, what is all this 3D human bullshit? Like, I just saw what was real, I don't want to participate anymore in this fake illusory world. Well, you can't be in a psychedelic state all the time. Or, I mean, you can approach life as a psychedelic experience in and of itself, where you're really paying attention and like integrating everyday experiences, just like you do with psychedelic work. But I often see people get stuck in, this desire to want to escape consensus reality. And that's where we see all sorts of like addictions and, all sorts of behaviors like that too.
Yeah, my brother, who's a drug and alcohol counselor, he was an addict for many years, and he was saying how when he was first getting sober, he just got his 5-year chip a couple days ago.
Awesome.
So he was saying when he first was trying to get sober, he applied for a job, and he was a felon. He was like a 2-time felon in California, and he was struggling. And he didn't bring it up on his application. They said, "You're hired. We love to have you on." And he's super jazzed about it. And then they found out that he was a 2-time felon. Called him in like, "Hey man, sorry, you can't work here." And he was so pissed and broken, like, "Man, I'm trying my best. I'm sober. I'm trying to stay sober. I'm trying to get a job. What's the point though? No one's going to hire me. This is not going to work. I'm not going to do this." And he said he wanted to go drink and do his thing. And he decided, okay, look, I'm just going to go to a meeting. And he went to an AA meeting that he'd been going, but he went to this one in particular. And there's a gentleman there who had stage 4 cancer, and he had about a month to live. And the guy was in an AA meeting talking about not drinking, and he's gonna die, and very, very, very soon. That guy's got some pretty bad circuit. He's got every reason to start drinking again, right? More so than not being able to get a job. But that shifted his way of thinking to say, that man's got it bad. I don't. If that man can stay sober, I could at least stay sober today, And so you have these little tidbits, man. That man who was staying sober during his cancer crisis and inevitable death probably saved my brother's life, and therefore saved my relationship with my brother, and saved my children's relationship with their uncle. And so you never know how you show up, how minor, and you might not even know about it too. That's kind of one of the most beautiful, the unsung heroes of the, angels who walk around, and they might say one word that just shifts everything for you, or gives you the light at the end of the tunnel to do the right thing eventually, so you never know what's going to be relevant to someone at a certain time to shift the way that they think. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like a desire to want to get things done and do it ultimately that can create change, I think.
That's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. A little shameless plug. I just got 11 years, June 7th. No, June 7th this year. 7 years, no alcohol. I was a bad alcoholic in my teen and early 20s. I would use all sorts of, any substance that was available, and it would be abused for sure. At that time I was, pissed off at the world and trying to push my limits to see how close I could get to death without actually going over. But my relationship has shifted so much since just removing that piece of alcohol. My relationship with other substances has changed from abuse to veneration and respect, and using them in ways to enhance my daily life and spiritual life, as opposed to using them for self-destructive means, right? Which was my intention back then. So it's amazing to hear that your brother has got 5 years, props to him, and hopefully he hears this, and congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, he's awesome. I love him a lot. It's really changed our relationship. It's meant the world to me. And my dad will be getting his 20-year chip
Wow.
this July. My brother will come out and give it to him, So addiction's a sneaky son of a bitch too. It's never ending. I've always heard it's just doing push-ups right now.
Mm-hmm.
While they're sober, that addiction's still going to the gym every day. But his life, my brother's life, it truly is, because he's messing around with meth a lot. And the last time that I kind of had an interaction with him when he was still in the throes of addiction to that degree was at San Diego County. And I went there and I told him, like, look, dude, we're done. We're done. You're not coming to see my kids. You're not coming to see me. It's over. Give me a ring if you need to, but not only do you need to be sober, you need to be emotionally sober as well, because this dude would fly off the handles, just so incredibly angry. And when I look at my brother's life then and see the way he operated and saw the way he was showing up, altercations with the police and the scumbags he was hanging around, no one cared about him, and he really didn't have anybody. To see him turn around his life is just so inspiring, because if that dude can do it, a lot more people have a way more better support system. Because I was there to say, I'm done with you.
Mm-hmm.
We're done. Like, talk on the phone, that's one thing, but other than that, not giving him money, I was already past that, but he turned it all around, and kind of feeding into your lifestyle, and a lifestyle for me too is I got, after he was working on being sober, he's doing a lot of shadow boxing and boxing and stuff. And Liz Carmouche, who's a UFC fighter, came out here to do some stuff with me when I was working with the Realm of Caring, a cannabis nonprofit. And she was kind enough to hook him up with a jiu-jitsu membership at 10th Planet San Diego with Boogeyman Martinez out there, Richie Martinez. And the idea of jiu-jitsu saved my life. I'm sure you've seen that bumper sticker or whatnot. I think it really resonates with my brother, because he found a sense of community there, and started getting successful, started to apply that anger that he had and apply it in a safe setting such as the jiu-jitsu mats. And now, I mean, the dude's just thriving. He was like, I don't know, maybe at his biggest 330 pounds or whatnot, or what was it? He was big. He was a big boy. And then he did a tournament at 225 a couple of years ago, so totally altered his life. And that community that jiu-jitsu provides totally pisses me off, the way that a lot of these gyms are not seen as essential, because they really are absolutely essential to a lot of addiction, I think.
And mental health.
And mental health, and obviously physical health, man. You want to, I mean, boy, it's a shame that they don't see those things as essential, yet liquor stores can be open, and I understand that, because people don't understand the withdrawals of alcohol are very, very real, and people could lose their shit if they don't have a pacifier, However, to kind of stop that at the degree that we have, I'm sure there's going to be some repercussions for that.
Yeah. So you talk about this experience of going to see your brother in San Diego County, and setting those really firm boundaries with a family member, someone that you've been extremely close with, you have the utmost love for, and just saying, like, dude, we're done. Like, I can't have you around my kids. You're a negative influence on me, and I don't want that in my life. I know how difficult that is to do that with a family member. I'm going through that myself, maybe 6 months ago, and I've been dealing with this my whole life. But, my mom has been suffering with alcoholism her whole life. And she's had periods of sobriety, long periods too, 10, 15 years here and there. But for the last, 7, 8 years, she's been deep back in it. And that on top, of 20 prescriptions that she's taking, for who knows what. And it got to this place where, whenever she would drink, she would become extremely verbally abusive through text message and voicemail and on social media towards me and my little brother. And we just had to, about 6 months ago, draw those lines and say, my brother's family wasn't at a place where they could go even talk to her. So I had to kind of be the representative for the family and go represent everyone and say, look, these are everyone's boundaries. No one is willing to speak with you right now just because it's so traumatic every time, we engage. But I'm willing to take on a little bit of that. You have to go to therapy, you have to get sober, and then we can, reestablish our relationship because we love you dearly. And I was bawling, man. I can't tell you how difficult it is, or it was for me to tell my mom, my only living parent, the person who raised me, that I can't have her in my life anymore, when all I want to do is reach out and give her a big hug and show her the way, right? Because I feel like I've traversed this before. I know she has before too. I know she has the answers, but she's just not engaging. And that was so hard and continues to be really hard. I still have dreams about her. I still pray for her every single day. I'm still sort of on a no contact with her, hoping that she, turns it around like your brother did. But only time will tell. So can you speak a little bit about how difficult that was to be able to, setting boundaries is hard anyway, but setting them with a family member or like a best friend. And a lot of us find ourselves in that position where we have to do that if we're going to protect our own health and our own sanity. Can you talk about what that was like for you?
Yeah, and that's what it is. I have 3 kids. I have my daughter just turned 13. I have a 9-year-old or 10-year-old son who's going to be 10 in a couple weeks, and then a 4-year-old daughter. My upbringing was not cheery, for as cheery as some people. My mother passed away when I was a kid. Like I'd mentioned, my dad was an alcoholic and had gotten into some non-healthy relationships with some other women, and it was just kind of a not the best upbringing. And when I met my wife and had my daughter and started shifting my life quite a bit as far as looking at other people that I need to live for and do work for, it's no longer about me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not going to allow someone who I know and love to influence my children in any way. And my brother wasn't, a bad dude. He's so loving. He's so caring. He really was. But he just was, he wasn't there. And he had such a short temper. And he and I, back then, 24 hours, within 24 hours, we're at each other's throats because I had such anger towards him being as awesome as he is and such a good, loving human being, and seeing him throw it down the shitter, and that's kind of what it was. It's like, man, this guy's got so much potential. He's smart. He's passionate, but he focuses those things on the wrong things. And it's just kind of at a point where, like, I'm angry when this dude's around. I'm angry, and that is going to spread to my children and my wife and disrupt the things that I'm trying to build here. And so I cannot do that anymore. And one of the more beautiful things about it, though, is that I had my dad to fall back on, because he has been sober for so long now, saying, hey, Dad, what do I do here, man? I love my brother. He means so much, but I'm done. And with his dedication to the program, it's easy for him. He's like, cut his ass off. It's what you have to do. He's not going to, you are never going to do anything to help him. You think by, it used to be you'd give him money. How did that ever work out for you? Never did. Even kind of the support thing where it was like, yeah, you could call me, but maybe 50-50 I'd answer the phone, because it's like, shit, what are you calling about? Like, I've tried my best with you. It's not until these people are willing to take it upon themselves to help themselves that things can change. And like I said, that's it for my brothers. Like, I need you not just sober, not just drug free, alcohol free. I need you in a place to where you could have some triggering events come to you, and I need you to maintain your shit. You know, I need you not to fly off and cuss or bring this energy, this tensity, this, you know, toxic field into my house and home. So for me, of course it's not easy, but you have to weigh the benefits. And people's bottoms are different, and it's not upon us to play savior to everybody. If their bottom is death, who are we to sit back and say, well, I should have done more, I should have. You can't. It's not your deal. It's not for you. And hurt people hurt people. That's what my jiu-jitsu coach in Denver says. You know, you don't know the pain that these people are going through that are willing to destroy their own lives to that degree. So sometimes it's kind of like, man, you know, I had an uncle who committed suicide several years ago, who was an alcoholic, and some family members were pretty pissed off about that. And I'm not condoning anything, but the lack of empathy to where, how dare you? Well, this man was hurting so bad. Can you imagine being that hurt? You know, can you imagine being that hurt that you drink that much and you end up hanging yourself? I can't. So I'm incredibly sad that anybody can take those things, those steps. But I'm not anybody's savior. And the more you try to attempt that, the more you're going to be disappointed and the worse it's going to be, you know? So definitely a hard choice, but one that absolutely had to be made, because the other thing too is that's a consequence of your addiction. Beck, that's my brother's name. The consequence is you're not seeing your niece and nephew anymore. You know, you're not seeing your brother, the only person who you know loves you more than anybody in this world. We're done. That's a consequence of your actions. That's not me being an asshole. That's you being an addict, you know? So realistically, after that, I've got nothing else I could take from you. But thank God that was enough for my brother. And it wasn't just that. It wasn't like, oh, I ended up saving him by laying down an ultimatum. He was sick of it. He was sick and tired of the shit that he was putting himself through. And so he had the period of time of getting sober in jail, which, by the way, there's more drugs in jail than there are out on the streets.
Yeah.
So he made that conscious choice to stay there. He went to a halfway house a program that was court ordered. He now runs that place.
Wow.
He's running that place with he's not running the place. He's been there for years. He's a very high up counselor there. If you look at the reviews, it's the Heartland House in San Diego. You look at the reviews, it's man, it gives me chills. The reviews are, Beck Jolly, you know, saved my life. He did this. He went out of his way and no one ever knew. And he's been there before. That's another thing that I find it very, very fascinating. Drug and alcohol counselors who have a degree in this shit, but have never had an addiction problem. You know, how are you going to talk to a meth head about getting off meth when you've never even had a beer, you know? But in the admiration that comes from some of these people that are court ordered to go to the Heartland House and to try to get sober, they're going to listen to someone like my brother who has been there, man. He's been to the clink, you know, he's done the whole nine. So,
yeah. So a few things on what you said. You know, if we can feel oftentimes we have to continue to always give support to family and friends who are struggling. But I think you're right. You know, by providing that support over and over again, it's almost like giving them a safety net where they feel like no matter what I do, no matter how far I push it, I'm always going to be caught by this family member. They're always going to save me. And for some people, not everyone, but for some people, the removal of that safety net is what it takes for them to hit that bottom, to hit the concrete and be like, oh, holy shit, like I got to do something. For others, removing that safety net can throw them into deeper despair, loneliness and things like that. So it's not for everybody. So that was one thing that came up for me. Another thing that came up, it's interesting because your brother and I share a lot of the same characteristics in our story, where I was an addict, I went to rehab, I got out of rehab. I never thought I'd find myself in addiction counseling, but I had a girlfriend at the time who was a counselor, and she's like, you'd be really good at this. And I just found my way into working for an agency up here in Fort Collins that said, we'll pay for your licensure. So now I'm a licensed addiction counselor. I've worked in opiate addiction centers. That's part of my private practice, is doing addictions. And, it has really provided me a great opportunity to give back what was given to me. And that allows me to be able to hold on to the sobriety that I have. I can't keep it just to myself. If I do that, then, it's going to go away. So I have to give it away. So yeah, that was a couple things. It's interesting that your brother and I have those sort of parallels. And another thing about that, you're absolutely right. Talking to someone who's been there, done that is so much better than talking to somebody with just the book smarts. And that's where I really think, not to toot my own horn, but my experiences through my addiction, even though at the time I thought that they were terrible, are now some of my greatest strengths moving forward and helping others. I've gotten to a place with a lot of my past now where I can sort of draw from those experiences and connect with others on that level where they're suffering. I've been suicidal before. And if I have a client come in who's suicidal, I can tell them my story and I can tell them how it felt. And they're like, oh my God, exactly how I feel. I'm like, yeah. I feel you, and I'm here to help.
And you could probably see it, you could probably pick up on it and know when they're bullshitting you and not, because, hey, I've been there. I've tried that exact same lie, dude. Exactly. Slow down,
Yeah, you can't bullshit the bullshitter.
Right.
So there's this thing that you mentioned earlier. You said that it's only been in the last few years, 4 or 5 years, that your mindset has changed. Where you said, before you hadn't really dabbled in even cannabis or any sort of psychedelic. Or maybe I got that wrong, but you said like a few years ago there was a major shift where I think cannabis was the gateway to open you up to greater parts of yourself.
Yeah, well, so not that I didn't dabble, because when I was in high school and in college, I'd ingest anything. I have a terrible relationship with alcohol, especially, right? It's in the genes, But then for some reason there came a point where I was like, oh, weed's for losers, all the while having no problem getting shit faced, right? So, got this mentality, and then I bought a place in Longmont with a couple acres and some apple trees, and I started getting back into gardening and eating food that I've grown. And what's really interesting is I read Michael Pollan's book, How to not How to Change Your Mind, The Omnivore's Dilemma. Mm-hmm. And I was reading about food and how it's processed and how it's shipped and all this, all the things that go into food, and understanding the nutritional density of a tomato that you grow in your backyard compared to something at the store. And a friend of mine's like, dude, you're so adamant about your food, yet you think weed's for losers and it's not medicine. And I watched a documentary called The Culture High. Mm-hmm. And there was a segment in there where a man named Jason was trying to help his son Jaden use cannabis for his epilepsy. And again, being a father of 3 children and a conservative, man, I'm more of a libertarian than a Republican anymore. But this is such a conservative issue as far as like, stay out of my business. I read it the other day. The government's jurisdiction ends at my skin. Mm-hmm. Leave me alone. This is not for you to tell me what I do internally if I'm being safe and not hurting anybody. But I watched this man who said his goal was to have his son say, "I love you." And at the time, my son was, probably 6 years old, and he was, he'd constantly say, I love you, Dad. I love you, Dad. I love you, Dad. And I would become annoyed by it because he said it so much, which is really, really strange, right? Like, this little boy loves me and he's expressing it. And after a while, it's just kind of like, okay, I know you've told me. After that, never again,
Mm.
never once. He says, I love you too. And I love it when he says that, because it made me realize there's parents who've never heard that out of their kids' mouths, and so it smashed me. And then I got turned on to the realm of caring, which is a cannabis nonprofit down in Colorado Springs, which was started by Charlotte Figge's mom, Paige, and my co-founder, Heather Jackson, whose son has Doja syndrome. These two mothers come together because their kids have epilepsy and they have no other options, and CBD helped. And that's Charlotte of Charlotte's Web. So that story airs
here who don't know, Charlotte's Web is an award-winning cannabis strain, known across the country.
Yeah, it kind of, I do feel it's that is the group that changed the most minds. When Dr. Sanjay Gupta interviewed Paige and Matt Figge on how this is affecting their daughter, that's where you have these medical refugees flooding Colorado saying, my child has epilepsy. I need to go to Colorado. So we need to become refugees from Iowa, Nebraska, Texas. Mm-hmm. We have to leave our home and everything we know because we don't have the liberty to treat our children, who are dying, by the way. This isn't like oh man, I smoke a little weed to sleep better at night. This is like, my kids are dying and I've got no options. Can I use cannabis? Absolutely not. New Jersey's notorious for this, right? So anyway, I go there and I meet families, and then I remember spending the day there, and I met Heather Jackson and heard her story, and a woman named Liz Gorman, and was just hearing their stories. And I came home, and for whatever reason, my kids were gone, and they came home later that evening. And I just remember getting on my knees and just crying and be like, hey, what'd you do today, Dad? And I just started crying, and I hadn't cried for 10 years, longer than that, And I'm like, what is going on here? And it was kind of the first time that I felt this consciousness shift in me, as far as like, okay, here's a purpose. Here's kind of what maybe was put here to do, as far as to help move this along and change minds like mine. And so the realm of caring's in Colorado Springs. I live in Longmont, and I said, I want to do something for you. I've got to get involved in this. And then so I started working for Charlotte's Web, and so worked for Charlotte's Web for over 3 years. And in that time, I had a psychedelic experience. I had a 5-MeO experience.
Was that your first psychedelic? Oh no, you said in college. Yeah. In college.
So in high school, I had done mushrooms, and I'd done acid one time. Mm-hmm. And both were very, unconscious, like, oh yeah, eat some shrooms or whatever. So it was really weird and not memorable, very, very similar to a lot of folks, but after that, I never touched them again. And that I was under the age of 18 when I did that. And then I was invited to a 5-MeO experience. I didn't know anything about it. The person who invited me just knew I was looking for something, and I just needed something. I knew I needed to. I don't know what it was, but I got the invite, had no idea, and I engaged in that, and it was just flipped me upside down. Obviously,
yeah, you went straight to the God molecule.
Yeah, it's like, hey, I've never been hiking. Okay, let's just do Mount Everest.
Yeah,
get out of the way. So that was obviously the most profound thing that's ever happened to me, and that's just a cold hard fact. It just has shifted everything I think about and how I think, and it's set me off into a catalyst of servitude and trying to help as many people as I can before I transition.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah, so you're describing a lot of the benefits that came from that experience, but for some of our listeners who may not even be familiar with 5-MeO, I'm sure they're asking like, well, that's all good and well, but what's the experience going to be like? Like it's a little scary, right? Can you describe what the 5-MeO experience was like while you were in it, if you remember?
Yeah, no, I do. It is not all peaches and cream. I'll just tell you that. I mean, things were very upside down for, well, up until today. It's still upside down. I mean, as far as it's not something to easily digest, and it was very, very difficult for the coming months to really understand what the hell just happened. During the experience, I remember it where I was with the shaman, and he told me what to do, and I remember doing it, and my arms were out, and I remember feeling it start to come on, and my arms would rotate like this, and I wanted to come internal like this. And what I recall wasn't visuals as much as there was a little bit of a visual effect to it, but the deep knowingness that time does not exist was the first thing that smashed me. And so that is probably one of the most well known and perceived every single moment, second, millisecond of your life is the concept of time.
And it's just a con.
That, yeah, it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't even exist. And I felt that. I felt that there's potentially a time where that will just not exist. There's no beginning, there's no end. And that is obviously incredibly scary.
Mm-hmm.
It was holy shit. Everything the simple things I thought were, no longer. And then this connectedness that is unlike anything, where it's not wasn't even like love as much as just like frustrations around the idea that we operate the way we do, even though we are the exact same experiencing the exact same thing, right? So the fact that I had the concepts of people treating each other wrong, and in particularly thinking about the gay and lesbian community, of anybody who would ever treat anyone any differently. That idea was just so incredibly foreign and wrong, and it just showed me how far we've fallen from the divinity that we are, that it hurt so bad that I thought that people have to fight for their rights to be told that, hey, we accept you. It's not even we love and see you exactly as you are, which is us. It's we accept you, we tolerate you. That's what people have to fight for. That concept, and to this day, hurts so bad. It's very it's a very difficult emotion to see things such as racism in existence, that we are in so steeped in right now, in understanding that this is a systemic problem that is not going away unless we make radical change. What hurts the most is that this is such a low level energy that we operate out of, because we're so far removed from our divinity that we can see other people as different. It's tremendously painful to think that we're racist, we're homophobic, we're sexist, we're all these really toxic things, because
Yeah, we
it's
destroy
not
the
what.
earth. If we were connected to our divine selves, we would see the earth as part of us too. We're part of this larger system, and just like in the body, the body system, if one part of the body wants to toxify the rest of the body, it can certainly do that. And people's bodies do that with malignant cancers and things like that. And that's sort of what we're choosing to do here with the planet and with society as a whole, is like, there's people that are making the choice to be a toxic presence as opposed to be an additive, positive presence. It's almost like they're taking away or swinging us further away from that divinity, and it makes us, people like you and me, have to fight harder and harder to try and bring it back.
Let me ask you this though, because this is what I've kind of thought of in some of these contemplative things now, is where you have, let's say, like we talked about, egoic people who are like, okay, yeah, I don't give a shit about the environment because I'm going to make a ton of money with this deal that I'm about to do, and so be it, right? That's okay. They're conscious of that terrible choice.
Mm-hmm.
The enemy that I see in this is the people who aren't even aware that we're in the middle of a war. You know what I mean? The people that don't see that now is the time to be fighting and moving forward and trying to do the right thing on the daily, because of, like, the way I see it, we don't have a ton of time to win this war. I'm not even concerned about those who are consciously doing things out of greed as much as the way larger population of people who are just unconsciously, here's my bag of chips, throwing it on the ground, like not even thinking twice about it. Or my favorite thing in the world is when people empty their ashtrays out of their car when they're driving down, and you see the front range and you come to a stop sign and you take that thing and you dump it out of your car. That mentality is a sickness. I think it's a sickness that is plaguing our society, and we don't even really acknowledge it as such. And that in itself is the most dangerous thing that we're up against, in my opinion, as of today.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. It's almost like, there's this mass majority of people who, for lack of a better term, have not woken up. They haven't awakened to the fact that they are more than just their human self, right? That's the sickness, right? That's the part that people are stuck in, is I am, whatever label my name is. I am this physical body. I'm only going to be here for 80 years, so I got to get the most out of it despite other people. I'm not going to take action now because I'm going to let the guy behind me do it while I just go ahead with doing what I want to do because I have limited time, right? And that is a sickness because, we need to, for you and I, it seems common sense, right? Once you wake up to the fact that you are more than human, and that other humans and plants and animals are just reflections of our own connectedness and being to this whole big game that we're in, this big universe, it becomes almost like, yeah, it's common sense. We need to take care of the planet. It's common sense. I need to, not go in my backyard and kill all the snakes back there, but instead, find a way to usher them peacefully out of the yard, or to live in symbiosis with them instead, or something like that. And so I would definitely agree with you. I think it's a sickness of, people not waking up, people not realizing that potential piece, that they are more than human. They are capable, even as an individual, right? Sometimes we get stuck in this place where, like, I'm just one person. What can I do, right? But you as a person and as a spiritual being have way more influence and power than you ever thought possible to create heaven on earth, to literally manifest the right thing, right? We all have that power. And then collectively, when that collective power comes together, like what we're seeing right now, like that has amplified power and exponential power above and beyond the individual, right?
Yeah, that's so when you talk about the individual, right? Because people use that as an excuse all the time. Oh, I'm one person. What can I do?
Sure.
Right? That's a common concept. Okay, imagine this: you're late for an airplane. I thought about this when I was late for an airplane once. You go to security. the line is out the door. You're waiting in that line for 20 minutes and you see another 15, 20-minute wait. You know you might miss your flight. One person comes flying in and cuts in line. How does that make you feel? It's just one person. Don't even worry about it. It's just one person. No, you're going to fly off the handle because screw you, one person. You just added this much time. It would piss you off, but it's only one person. So next time you're kind of in that, oh, I'm only one person mentality, think about when you're late for something and someone cuts you off or gets in front of you, and then see if you have that same kind of emotion. But it's a definite cop out anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, oh, I'm just one person, or my vote doesn't count. Well, that one's true. No, just kidding. So not on the local elections. The local elections are very, very important, but national, whatever. But it's definitely a cop out to kind of say, well, you know, I what can I do? I can't do anything. You know, well, you can. There's a lot you can do, and it's a matter of like, are you going to put the effort forth to change things? You know, and whatever it is, whether it's, let's say you're not on the front lines of a protest or whatever, but maybe you have to raise your kids and you could work diligently to make sure that they grow up to be conscious of other human beings. That's your contribution, man. And if that's all you can do, that's a lot better than just saying, oh, fuck it, I'm dead in 80 years anyway.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I love the saying that goes, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Yep.
Right. So
absolutely.
If you don't think you can make a change, then you're not going to make a change, you know. But if you think you can and you put effort and action behind that thought, you will most certainly, you know, everybody has such an important puzzle piece and role to play in, you know, consensus reality, what we see as consensus reality. And so, you know, to give up your piece to somebody else to make that decision for you just does not sit well with me personally. I want to get back to this thing. You mentioned the term cannabis refugee, right? When you were talking about people coming to Denver to give their kids CBD. And I'm wondering if this can also be applied now with decriminalization around mushrooms in Denver, if maybe Colorado might be seen now as a psychedelic refugee spot, or people who maybe have feared for legal repercussion and have always wanted to try psilocybin mushrooms are now finding themselves taking, you know, journeys to Denver, you know, and maybe even seeing them as like rites of passage. I have to go to Denver and do this, and then I'm going to come back and change a different person. I mean, you're working through Unlimited Sciences. I'm hoping you talk a little bit about your work with Unlimited Sciences, but also you guys are really helping to fill that space a little bit as the space opens up to more and more psychedelic practitioners and personal work and research work and things like that. This is really becoming a hub for psychedelics in all forms. I'm wondering if you're personally seeing, you know, this idea of psychedelic refugees migrating to places where it's more legal.
Not yet. Obviously, the robust data around psychedelics helping is not there the way it was for cannabis. And when you have children who are having seizures and you're a parent, you're going to go to the ends of the earth to accomplish their health. So it's very, very different. Psychedelics are very, very different. Our research nonprofit, what we are doing is trying to understand how people are doing that. So that exact question is really, really interesting. So what our study is, it stems from the realm of Karen's data collection on cannabis use. How are people using cannabis in the real world, right? So when these mothers are getting together and giving their children cannabis, back when it was medical only, well, how many milligrams are you giving your kid? How's it interacting with this pharmaceutical? You know, what time of the day are you giving it to them? That information started to get collected, and then eventually it just became so robust that they used Johns Hopkins to collect that data to now understand when someone can call into the realm of caring's call center and say, hey, I've heard of cannabis for MS. I don't know where the hell to start. What do I do? Right? Well, people could call in, they could say, hey, look, here we've got, 72 people who are using it for the exact same type of MS that you have, and they're using these type of pharmaceuticals, and this is what is showing to be promising. That is what the Unlimited Sciences hopes to do in the future as far as understanding how people are using it. Is there a big uptick in use in the city of Denver now that it's decriminalized? What are the outcomes of the experiences if you were working with an underground therapist, or maybe with your buddy in his basement because he grows shrooms now or something like that, or maybe you're in a circle setting? What are these experiences looking like? And how can we take that data to understand best practices for the future? Because eventually this is going to be at a minimum medicalized. Mm-hmm. And if it becomes legalized, the data that we are trying to collect can help inform people to have a safe journey, because there's a huge psychedelic naive swarm of people who are going to come to this. There's going to be a story that breaks, and people are going to say, I've had it. I've had enough bullshit. I've struggled with my PTSD as a veteran. I'm going to Denver to try this, right? Or that story airs on CNN the same way it did with Charlotte. And the people who are at the end of their ropes are going to give it a shot. If we don't collect this type of data to at least give them a pretty good opportunity, then you'll have things like where people come to Colorado and they eat a whole 100 milligram edible because they don't know shit. They bought a candy bar to get high, and now they're going to the hospital because they're, losing their shit. Completely safe at the end of the day, but it could be very traumatic in the time being. But that same stuff is going to happen with psilocybin. Our study, it's called prospective observational research. So anybody who intends to use psychedelic or psilocybin in particular, and we aren't encouraging use. We're just very knowledgeable that this is happening. So whether it's legal or illegal, people are using these things, but we don't encourage use. But if you are going to use these substances, whether you're in Denver or worldwide, basically you have to be 18 and fill out an English survey. Enroll in this study. It's a series of surveys. And when we talk about what can you do for your part, right? I'm only one person. I don't have time to go protest for Decriminalize Denver. I don't have time to support a nonprofit. I don't have the money to give to a nonprofit. But if you do intend to use psilocybin, because that's something that you've done in the past and you tend to do it again, and you're going to, enrolling in this, it's a series of 5 surveys, lets us understand how people are using it, what's working, what is not working. We will publish the negative too, just to be clear. We are not a pro psilocybin. I personally believe that the outcomes will be positive, but JHU and our organization is unbiased for understanding how is this affecting the population, what's the best way to approach this. I believe it will be a medical model that requires a couple therapists in the future. But again, providing that data so we can then see what is happening. Are people going to Denver? Are they going to Oakland, California, because it's decriminalized there? Santa Cruz? What's happening in Oregon when they go legal there in the coming months? Oregon's got that initiative that they're probably going to get on the ballot, and if they pass it, how's that model look? What are the outcomes of people using legal psilocybin in a therapeutic setting with professionals up there, compared to the folks who are taking a few grams at a rock concert, right, at Red Rocks, or using it in the most conservative city in Texas? I mean, we know that if you have let's say you have 3 grams of psilocybin and they have the exact same amount of psilocybin in them, that drug can be ingested in different settings. So again, let's say you take that 3 grams and you're at a frat house party with kegs, of beer and there's fights and death
Done
metal
that
music
before.
raging. Yeah, exactly. Or you take that exact same amount with a therapist, you're going to have a completely different outcome. Whereas if you take a Xanax and you take that Xanax in any setting, you're going to have the same outcome no matter what. You're going to have a, pretty much same level of response physiologically.
Mm.
And so that's the difference between psychedelics and a lot of drugs, pharmaceutical drugs. And that's the kind of information that we have the ability to collect, but we need people to enroll and do their part to help us accomplish understanding what it looks like for the general population.
That's so great. And, I think most listeners are probably most familiar with scientific research with drugs anyway, being like clinical trials where they're testing drugs on animals and then on humans to see if it's safe before it goes to prescription. But I love this style of research too, because it's such a wealth of anecdotal information. Like you said, like that database that Johns Hopkins holds, like someone could call up and say like, I'm dealing with this, and this, and they can run those across all the data that they have and pull out specific anecdotal case studies that can help inform decisions, even if there aren't like official clinical studies done with that form of MS or whatever. People are still using it, and there's still valuable data out there that can be used. Technically, people would think it's probably a little more high risk to base their medical decision making off of anecdotal or case study evidence as opposed to clinical trials. But someone like myself or you who sees the value in case study and anecdotal observational evidence, that is so much more information that someone can have to make that informed decision, as opposed to not having any information at all. So much more, it's a wealth of information.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, something that's very interesting, again, when you're talking about psychedelics and clinical studies, the exact same populations that are unable to meet the requirements to test into a Johns Hopkins clinical trial very well could be the exact same populations that would benefit from these substances. Obviously, if you have a history of mental disorders, this is the biggest one where these things tend to have the potential to have any sort of harm. If it's going to show up, it's going to show up in mental disorders. Mm-hmm. However, it has the ability or the potential to address those exact same issues. But if you go to JHU and you say, oh yeah, my dad's bipolar, my mom was probably bipolar as well. I don't really show symptoms of that, but sometimes whatever. You're not getting in that study, mm-hmm. And I don't know what the rigors are, but I promise you that there's levels of PTSD that will probably exclude you from these studies. And that is some of the things that they are finding that it's helping with to some degree. So I think the best way to kind of show why our studies interesting is exactly what we kind of are. We're a community-based organizations. That's what we like to think. We like to think that we help represent the people who are interested in psilocybin and understanding where this is going to go. And so my friend Rashad Evans, who's a UFC light heavyweight champion of the world back in the day and just was inducted in the Hall of Fame, he was on the Joe Rogan show and he was talking about unlimited sciences and what we're up to. And we got hundreds of emails after that. You get that kind of exposure. We got hundreds of emails. And I recall one of these emails being from a gentleman saying, hey, I have facial tics like Tourette syndrome, and cannabis doesn't work, pharmaceuticals don't work. The only thing that works for me is psilocybin. He's like, if I use psilocybin, that helps. And then you hear like Paul Stamets' story of helping with his stuttering. Paul Stamets, who's a famous mycologist, who I'm sure that some of the audience knows, he always talks about having a psilocybin trip, and that's what helped him stop stuttering. But this gentleman writes in and he says, I have these facial tics that show up in that way. That's something I've never heard of. And again, I'm new to this, a couple of years into this, but I hadn't heard that. And anybody I've ever talked to said, I've never heard of that either. Those are the types of bits of data that we will be able to glean from a prospective observational research that clinical will not get, right? Psilocybin has thousands of years of history of use. We've been using this forever. It's not a pharmaceutical drug that needs to be developed in a lab. We have history, and we're entering into these new history experiments like Decrim Denver, right? So collecting that data from the people is so important to understanding how they're using it, what's good, what's bad, and that could really advance our understanding of psilocybin and psilocybin practices.
Yeah, and for the listeners out there who might want to participate in this study, just so you know, I'm going to post links in the descriptions and websites and places that people can go to look at this. Dell, you and I spoke before the podcast, and by the time this airs, you're hoping that your study is up and running and people can start to contribute in that way. So I encourage those of you who are already out there using, substances to alter your consciousness, please do contribute in this way. One person can make a huge difference. And like we said before, like the ripple effect, who knows, you might have this piece in this study that was just your one little group of surveys, but it's going to be read by thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And your one little piece can have a ripple effect with many of those people. You just have no idea how far it's going to go. I did want to, because I didn't get much time before the podcast to talk to you much about my interest in psychedelic research. I'm currently pursuing a PhD through the School of Social Work here at Colorado State University. And my dissertation topic is on ketamine-assisted psychotherapies, which are legal here in the United States. And we have great clinics up here in Fort Collins that I have connections with. And, your study, you said, people are out there using it and they're using it for lots of different reasons. And we want to find out what those reasons are. My particular research is focused in on the folks who are using psychedelics, not necessarily to work on mental health issues or trauma issues, but those who are seeking healing through what is commonly called the mystical state experience or unitive consciousness, breaking through the veil completely, losing your body and merging with the oneness of everything for that time being, and then coming back and finding exceptional healing from that. Johns Hopkins put out a study last year or 2 years ago saying that it was this mystical experience as part of the psilocybin trip that facilitated the greatest amount of healing long-term for individuals who participated. People were saying it was the most important experience of their life, and the vast majority of them said it was in their top 5. And so that's really calling to me, that the importance of having that experience with the mystical. And in particular, because there's been plenty of studies with ketamine and with other psychedelics as far as, what the mystical state experience looks like. We even have mystical state questionnaires where you can tell if somebody had that full-blown experience or not. And then we have quite a few studies telling about the benefits that come from it long-term, right? But we have very few studies on the front end of the mystical experience, which is I'm hoping to open that whole side of the research that's missing and really start to look at what are some of the preconditions that help facilitate mystical experiences. For instance, the same person can take, 5 grams of mushrooms or do a ketamine therapy and have a mystical experience, and then the very next week do the same amount and not have a mystical experience in the same setting. But there may be changes in their mindset, there may be changes in their belief systems that all play factors in the emergence of this mystical state. And so my research is really going to focus in on And it's going to be through qualitative interview processes with individuals who are, using high dose ketamine, trying to figure out like what are some of the mindsets, what is some of the mental training that these people have, what are some of the belief systems that they hold, what are aspects of safety in the room, what about physical ceremonial objects that are present, what are and try to nail down through the data like. I probably won't come up with definitive answers through this study, but I'm hoping that it not only opens up that part of research where we're looking at preconditions a little bit more closely, but also I'm hoping to at least come up with a few themes to be able to add to the literature so that people can, when they are working with their set and setting and ceremony and ritual, that they can have some basic guidelines or basic structure where like, oh, if I meditate for a month every day prior to, then I'm more likely to have a mystical experience as opposed to just jumping in. So I know we didn't get to talk about it much beforehand because it's mostly been with the psilocybin policy, but I wanted to run that by you and see what you thought of it.
Yeah, that's so important. It's so relevant to these types of substances, right? In understanding lifestyle, and that's even our study steps into diet, right? Are you vegan? Are you dairy free? Are you gluten free? Because we want to know, does that have any play? I don't know. So many people respond so differently, and maybe we say, hey, look, people who are dairy free have way more impactful trips, right? We don't know these things until we study them. But one thing I'm going to throw your way, speaking about this, because you're talking about some just absolutely brilliant, important things to validate this. We have a webinar that we do called Unlimited Voices, and we just recorded one with a gentleman named Dr. Gunther Weil. And Gunther was on the Harvard psilocybin team with Tim Leary and Ram Dass. And we haven't launched this yet, but you've got to watch it. The man is brilliant. He's so fun to chat with. But he has an organization called Value Mentors. And what it is, my little understanding of it is basically you take these tests to understand where your values lie. Right. And so what he wants to do, he's 83 years old. He's thinking about having a full circle deal where he steps back into psychedelics a little bit maybe. And we are discussing the potential of him doing a study on values of people before their psychedelic trips and their values after. So same thing that you're kind of hinting at, like, what brought you to this? What do those values look like? And then how do those values change or lend to the actual experience, whether you're using high doses of ketamine or psilocybin or things of that nature? How does that change? What does that look like? Is that kind of the information that could change minds, where you have a IRB approved study saying, hey, look, Shane is running this deal where we can see his clients or subjects or whatever it is, the cohort has way stronger values post their ketamine experiences. They're better parents, they're better community members, they're better wives, husbands, kid, whatever that is. But it's not until that stuff's on paper that people take it serious, which is really kind of a shame anymore that we can't take people for what they say. But I was on a podcast the other day and I said, I am a way better parent now that I've experienced these things. I know I am. Mm-hmm. I'm coming from more empathy. I no longer say the cop out bullshit of, like, to my son, stop crying, these kind of like knee jerk reactions that were just, hammered into us as males to regurgitate on our sons. Stop crying, don't be a sissy, this kind of bullshit. Now it's like, hey man, what's wrong? How can I help you? Let me give you a hug, let me love you. What can I do? That never entered my mind pre psychedelic experience. And so the value thing is really, really interesting. We need to talk offline on that to kind of, because he has validated measures in his value mentors assessments. So these are recognized by institutional review boards as legit questions and promising research if answered correctly or in the fashion that it's structured. So we should definitely kind of rap about that offline. But values are a big thing, man. And if people can have positive, more enriching lives due to these things, it's kind of like, how can we advance that in a safe, practical manner? That's kind of long-term goals, man.
Yeah. And that's a perfect segue into the next sort of it's sort of a topic shift, but still, in the realm of consciousness, and that is parenting. And I still want to talk to you about jiu-jitsu too. That's something that we're both passionate about. But and maybe this conversation will all be intermixed. But a conversation I've been having with a number of guests on the podcast are around what's called psychedelic-informed parenting. So parents who have had psychedelic experiences and how those experiences have changed their ability to parent, their connection to their kids, and things like that. But also had lots of discussions with people on the podcast about psychedelic-informed jiu-jitsu, or the marriage of jiu-jitsu and microdosing, or jiu-jitsu and cannabis, which I know is a huge thing in the jiu-jitsu culture. So yeah, I was hoping we could talk a little bit about that. I'm an aspiring parent. My wife and I don't have any kids, but she's given me the 1-year notice. She just had me go out and buy a new vehicle the other day, and in preparation for having little Shanes running around. But that's something that, I love to pick your brain about, because I want to be, a great parent. I don't want to continue the patterns that were forced upon me. And I think my psychedelic experiences are vastly going to improve my ability to parent and recognize myself doing those things, and my ability to catch those things and change it. But also my lifestyle doing jiu-jitsu. I don't know how integrated your kids are with jiu-jitsu, but I intend to have them starting from a young age. And that with jiu-jitsu comes, an entire new value system, right? How you hold yourself, how you think about yourself, how you treat other people, how you avoid conflict. All those things that came from jiu-jitsu, I'm going to try and integrate into my parenting style as well. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about all that: psychedelic-informed parenting, jiu-jitsu-informed parenting, what it's been like for you, all that stuff.
Yeah, being a parent is the most tremendous, beautiful blessing that's ever happened to me. The ability to do it right and kind of be the line in the sand for my lineage on how I want my kids to feel when they're kids. In my home, it was a lot of fear, a lot, like, when anybody got home, my heart dropped. You know what I mean? I didn't want people to come home. And so I don't want my kids to ever experience that. It's interesting, kind of the correlation. I was taking my kids to jiu-jitsu. I used to wrestle in high school, so I kind of like combat sports. I had a bunch of friends who fought in the UFC, and so they I've always been around that. And my old business partners, all American wrestlers, so I was around a lot of this, but I wasn't doing it anymore. And but my kids were going to jiu-jitsu, and kind of whatever. And then I had a psychedelic experience, that 5 ceremony, the 5-MeO ceremony. And I came from that, and I came back, brought my kids to jiu-jitsu, and I'm sitting there watching. I'm like, what the fuck am I doing sitting here, not using this body that I don't know how much longer I'm going to have this thing? Why am I not out on the mats? I worked out a lot, lifting weights, but I'd go to the gym and I'd lift weights and run in a circle, and it was not satisfying at all. So I thought after this 5 ceremony, I'm like, I'm going to get into this. I'm going to start doing this, because I used to wrestle. So I started going to wrestling practices. And Connor Hewen, who runs 10th Planet Denver now, was running this. And I remember 10th Planet coach Drew Ash at Boulder was saying, man, what you need to start doing jiu-jitsu. You need to start doing jiu-jitsu. I'm like, oh no, that's too slow and whatever. And then after I got my body kind of rocked a lot of times in the wrestling practice, which is a totally different sport than jiu-jitsu, I'm like, man, I'm just not old. I'm not fast and young enough for this anymore. So I transitioned into jiu-jitsu, but it was that psychedelic experience, taking my kids to jiu-jitsu, that made me realize I'm still very, very young. I need to be engaged. I'm not going to just do jiu-jitsu so I have something to do, but because I want to be able to roll with my great grandchildren, So I kind of owe it to my kids to get involved, and start doing this. And then the blessings on top of actually dedicating myself to something like jiu-jitsu, and then seeing the outcomes, and then even being able to have an opportunity to apply them in real life is a unique thing. But back to the parenting, the difference in my mentality and the way I look at my daughters and my son it's just night and day. It's just night and day because I could empathize with them. I absolutely realize that they are not my children to mold into mini me's. They are their own people. They're their own entities with their own ideas that don't have shit to do with me. And that is the most beautiful thing in the world, that my son loves to build Legos, and he's such a creative in that fashion. He likes to build. I can't stand it. I can't stand Legos. I don't like them. I never have. It's never been my deal. But I look at him and say, where did he get that? That's so cool. Where a few years ago, like, yeah, Legos suck. No, I'm not playing with you. I don't want to do that. Like that empathy and that recognition of how awesome they are and how individual they are is really important to have. And then when you work and operate with someone who's younger, like my 4-year-old, she just turned 4. You look at them and they're tripping 24/7. They are in it. They are so wise and are so tuned in to what is important, and really, really what is important, that it's a burden that, dang it, someday, because of the bullshit that I'm going to inevitably participate and force her into participating, she's going to lose that, where I think maybe it's like Michael Pollan's book. I think it's the best description, where this child is a lantern, she's got light, and she's looking all around everything, where we're just flashlights right here. What's in front of us, that's it. But seeing her operate and look at bugs and trees and ask questions and say the silliest things, now that I've had these experiences to understand what childlike joy is and childlike mirthfulness, wow, what a blessing it is to have been there, in a sense, to see everything as brand new, and I mean brand spanking new, after a psychedelic trip, and then see that same experiencing happening for a young person. It just is about as gorgeous as it gets, and so I'm still struggling as a parent, as every parent does, right? I definitely lose my temper and am not as soft as I need to be sometimes, or not as impatient, or not as patient as I need to be. But I absolutely promise you, I'm 50% better than when I was,
It's amazing.
And,
Like something that stood out to me, sorry to interrupt, was this idea that, without that perspective that the psychedelic provides oftentimes, sometimes we can get lost in that, and I'm not a parent, so I'm speaking for all parents, not being a parent, but we can get caught in that place of like, I'm going to mold this person, or I'm going to make decisions in their best interest for them. as opposed to now, like with the psychedelic experience, it's almost like you see your kids as like some of your greatest teachers, right? And they're just like 4 years old, 13 years old, and they are some of your wisest and greatest teachers, not only about the world and about reality and about what's possible for you to still engage in, but I'm sure they teach you about yourself, and how you deal with things, and help you bring up, you know, awareness of old patterns, and like, oh shit, like I just did that thing that my dad used to do to me, you know, and it's because of this little person right here that has no idea about that history with my dad, but it was what they just said there that helped me just have this reliving of this trauma, and now I get a chance to heal from it. And so it seems like it's such an opportunity if you take it that way, as opposed to, again, letting the ego get involved and saying like, no, I know what's best for my kid. They're going to be a musician, or they're going to be, you know, straight A student. And I kind of worry a little bit about that with myself and my parenting, because my wife and I joke about it. We say there's only two main, well, maybe three main rules in our household growing up. Number one, you have to get at least a blue belt in jiu-jitsu. After that, you can go do whatever you want. Number two, no country music under this household.
Wait, tell me, what about Sturgill Simpson?
No country music, not in this house. And then the third one, if you kids are going to go out and experiment with drugs, which I know you are because you come from me, please come and talk to us about it first, because I don't want you getting your information from your peers who are ignorant. I want you to get it from people who have that experience. And part of that, you know, that second rule, or the first rule of jiu-jitsu, I think that's so important. My master from Brazil, actually, Master Silvio Bering, he had that same rule for his kids, you know, blue belt, and they all reached black belt level. Now they're high level teachers in Brazil, but that made so much sense to me. Like, yeah, at a blue belt, you have like basic understanding and self-defense. You can take care of yourself. You have this air of confidence. You know you can do things if you put your mind to it, and that's going to serve you so well in life. But on the other side, like, I feel a little bit in that ego space where I'm like, am I forcing my kids to do jujitsu? Like, what if they just hate it right off the bat and don't take to it at all? Like, should I still make them get that basic blue belt and go through with it? And I'm still a little torn with that piece, but
yeah, there's love, because I do that too. My son's an incredible athlete, but he doesn't like the pressure of like when he played football, they'd want to hand it off to him every time because he was fast and good, and he just didn't like the pressure. And some kids aren't into that. And like wrestling, like I said, a lot of my friends are high level wrestlers and their kids wrestle, and some of them enjoy it, but really good way to break a child's spirit is to force them to do something they don't want to do, you know? And Gibran Kabrani, I'm butchering the name, but there's a poem called "Your Children Are Not Your Children," you know, and look it up. Maybe we could put it in the show notes or something, but your children are not your children. And it's a really beautiful concept that, you know, these are their own individual people who do their own things. However, if you lead by example, because right now my son is not doing jiu-jitsu. My daughter's on the wrestling team at Westview, and she's done jiu-jitsu but didn't like it as much as wrestling. I want to lead by example. And so I go to jiu-jitsu Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 a.m. every morning. And I've never missed that unless I'm out of town. And I roll with my kids in my yurt. I have a yurt, and so now I've just decked it out in jiu-jitsu mats. So now we call it the hurt yurt. And I like to roll with my son, and my ability, I'll throw him moves and show him. But until he says, you know what, Dad, I think I want to do this. I want to roll, because he's at an age now too where, you know, 10 years old now, he's past that line when they're young. If you get them when they're young, and that's just the way of.
I lost you for a second. Sometimes, apologize to the audience, sometimes our connection gets a little wonky with Zoom, but Dell should be back momentarily.
Life,
oh,
they're not going to think twice about it.
Oh, I got
letting
you
them
back.
into it.
Oh, then everyone went away again. Dell, are you there?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. So you were talking about when you get your kid involved from a young age.
Yeah, when they're in a really young age, that's just the way of life, right? Just the way it is. But again, my son being 10, he's done jiu-jitsu in the past, and he was getting really good. He was starting to get his body awareness about him. My daughter does wrestling now. She likes wrestling. I see too many parents forcing their kids into the sports that
That they failed
suck
at.
at.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I never was good at any of it, so my heart isn't into it. But the more I do jiu-jitsu, the more it's kind of like, this is important. Jiu-jitsu teaches you so much about everything. I mean, there's nothing in this world that couldn't be solved by that. And it's so interesting to me, the situation we're at with police officers. I've said it before, and it's so clear now. Every police officer needs to be a blue belt. Why would we not implement that? Because you are taking a career where you're putting yourself in danger every single day, yet the hours that are required to train are nothing. I don't want to be too out of bounds, but I would fight 75% of the cops in Colorado, and I think I do a pretty damn good job against them because they are not trained. The other 25% take their shit very seriously and train probably regularly, whether it's jiu-jitsu or some sort of martial art or striking or something like that, because they value not only their lives but their community lives. I'll tell you right now, no blue belt is going to put his knee on the neck of a man who is handcuffed for 8 minutes, let alone 60 seconds, let alone one blue belt and 3 blue belts standing around. Okay. They're going to understand what is the significance of putting your knee on another man's neck. You're going to understand blood chokes. You're going to know that you should not be doing that shit. And 2, you're not going to be afraid of anybody who's in their handcuffs. That man was afraid. He's a fearful, untrained, unqualified person to be put in that position to protect us. The other 3, who I think are victims of the circumstance, and a couple of them are rookies, if they had training, they very quickly would have said, hey, step off, he's fine, we got this. I have the confidence in myself to tell you to step off and go chill out over there or something. We'll handle this because you're heated or whatever the hell's going on. This is so preventable. It's so easy. We talk about defund the police. One, should be every conservative's wet dream, right? Because I guarantee they're mismanaging the money and they could use it somewhere else. I'll tell you, the first place they use the mismanaged funds of what they get, it's a requirement to get a blue belt. You want to be a police officer? Prove it. Dedicate yourself, because if you're going to dedicate yourself, you could get your blue belt in a year very, very easily if you're dedicated. That's an absolute truth. So not to have that as a requirement is a disservice to every police officer, because now what you have is a bunch of pissed off citizens who think all cops are a bunch of chumps and are hating on them irresponsibly, because most cops are good people trying to do the best they freaking can, and now they're all the enemy. And then also you protect the community you're sworn to protect, right, by de-escalating things, being confident in yourself to approach things in a non-physical manner, let alone if you show up with some jacked up cauliflower ear, people are going to know, the wise people, not to mess with you, right? And they'll de-escalate themselves. So
yeah, I totally agree with that, 100%. And I think it should definitely start with what's most present and clear right now, right? Police training. But in my master's degree, I studied sport and performance psychology, and we had this assignment where I came up with a plan to integrate jiu-jitsu into middle school and high school curriculum, sort of like a PE class. and and backed it up with all sorts of studies about jujitsu and mental health and jujitsu and bullying and jujitsu and confidence and all these things. And you're right. If a police officer is trained, they are going to have the confidence going into these dangerous situations to know, okay, I know I can slow my breathing down in a tight situation. I know that I can always find an escape if I slow down, or I know that all these ideals that we get from jiu-jitsu. Well, imagine that's integrated into school systems now, where kids are learning basics of jiu-jitsu, and everyone in the school learns these techniques, right? That's going to cut down on bullying, right? People are not going to stand for being bullied, but also I strongly stand by this, but the more we've had lots of bullies come into the gym, and the longer they train with us, the less they bully. It turns a bully into a non-bully, because they see a lot of the hurt that they're causing, or they see how inappropriate their behavior is. So the idea that, yes, I think it would be extremely useful for police, extremely useful for military. It's already used for military purposes to some extent, but even, for the youth too. And, allowing people to step into their own truest, highest self without having this overlooming fear of, oh shit, I have to survive. I have to take care of myself. Like that kind of goes away when you train jiu-jitsu for a while. Like you can walk down a dark alley and there could be sketchy people down there, and you're hyper aware of the situation because you know what's possible, but there's a lot less fear to it, right? You're like, okay, I know my exits. I'm looking. If I can avoid this, I can run away if I need to. Okay, there's 3 of them, so I need to make sure that these jiu-jitsu techniques are not used because another one could come up and kick me in the face or whatever. So the general awareness, the personal awareness, and that personal confidence, I think, are such huge benefits of jiu-jitsu in general. And you said you're at 10th Planet, right?
Yeah, I train in between Boulder and Denver, but I train mostly, like I said, at the 6 a.m. And with this COVID, the folks that I've been training with, there's basically 4 of us, and we before this happened, we were exposed to each other every day of the week. Our kids were sick before this. We all think that some of us have had COVID. So we've been training consistently through that, and training at one of my coach's basements, and then in the yurt up here, but that's such an important part of my life now. And I hope to continue it forever, because it's the best exercise you could get, but you're right. The confidence, the ability to make sound decisions is important. And that's one thing that my brother does. And he works at another addiction place for young men. And somehow he's implemented and got it covered under their insurance of boxing and a jiu-jitsu class that he teaches these men in recovery. And they enjoy it. They love it. And that's the kind of stuff, like I said, Connor Hewan says, hurt people, and you've got this population of humans running around who are uninitiated, never done anything hard in their lives, and they think they're badasses, and they're just hurt. They're just kind of hurt people, and they reciprocate that to any victim that will allow them. And there's nothing like the 135 pound purple belt to just whoop your big ass to give you a real dose of like, whoa, there's some bad dudes out there, and put you in check.
Yeah, another aspect of the physical health benefits too that I've been talking around with some of my teammates, a benefit of jiu-jitsu is it's like literally the most physical contact for a martial art, right? We're literally sweating on each other, sometimes in each other's mouths. I have training partners' blood all over some of my gis and some of my shorts that I grapple with, right? So we're sharing each other's microbiomes in these intimate quarters. And I have a sense that, with exposure to more and more microbiomes with that sort of proximity, we sort of build up our immune systems to have greater resilience against other microbiomes because of the exposure, right? Much more than somebody who maybe sits at home all day and doesn't have interactions with anybody, right? Like if they go out there, their immunity is going to be way lower than like you or I, who is, literally sweating on each other and sharing each other's biomes.
Yeah, but let's take it a step further, right? Like, how about the putting yourself in a situation where another man is trying to kill you
Yeah.
and choke you to death? The stresses that your body go through to fend that off is going to probably help that immunity to say, okay, there's something happening. You know what? I get choked out 5 times a day at jiu-jitsu, or I practice this often. This isn't that big of a deal. I mean, obviously that's, could be naive to some degree, but I absolutely know for a fact people are exercising and introducing that stress, especially that high level of a stress. It makes you more resistant. It's like cold showers or so, whatever, ice baths, Wim Hof, like subjecting your body to the stressors that you could control and be safe at.
Mm-hmm.
Ice bath, okay, how about a rear naked choke?
Mm-hmm.
Like you want to feel the stress of losing consciousness, that's I'll take that over an ice bath any day. Not to say I don't enjoy ice baths, and I've got the trough to do it, and we do it after practice sometimes, but all these biohacks of let's introduce some minor stresses. The newest one that I'm looking at is actually injecting rattlesnake venom into small doses of that toxin into your body to create a stress and a response, and then overcome other stress responses that come. But those are kind of like those cheat code things, like, oh, I'm going to take these supplements, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and all these little things. I'm going to take steroids, but I'm going to still eat like shit. I'm still going to, not do the other things like sleep well, and so it's all these cheat codes that happen. Jiu-jitsu is that all-encompassing biohack that is mental, it's physical, it's the whole package of human health,
Yeah.
because you get the confidence, you get the physical thing. I think one of the reasons why I get so cold now is because ever since I started jiu-jitsu, I've cut not a lot of weight, but probably like 10 or 15 pounds. And for me, that's a lot. So I'm a lot skinnier now. But I had a guy say something like, a friend of mine, like, oh man, you look so skinny now. And I'm like, yeah, I've been doing a lot of jiu-jitsu. And he was drinking, and he wanted to bring it. He's, 195 and I'm 165. I said, all right, yeah, if you want to do this, and just felt very comfortable, very controlled, tapped his ass out multiple times, and just like, it's level of confidence, physical ability, but all that. I think maybe that's why I'm cold and I hate the winters in Colorado anymore.
Yeah, it's the whole package for sure. And I've been practicing jiu-jitsu now for 13, close to 14 years, and suffered through some of my worst injuries, my biggest challenges, the most powerful ego deaths I've ever experienced. And it is the holistic package. And now this deep into it, it is so much like the physical piece. Yeah, it's still there, but now it's so much more of like a spiritual practice for me, where I bow onto that mat, and that's my cue that we're stepping on sacred ground. So many great people have come before me and dedicated their lives to this. And this, like you said, this is important. This matters. And that's sort of where I, on a day-to-day basis, play with my mind with active meditation, through jiu-jitsu. I love it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's good. It's definitely it's that integration piece, right? When you have these, again, that monster psychedelic experience that disrupts everything. It's very much jiu-jitsu that has grounded me, because we always talk about, yeah, great, you did an ayahuasca retreat on Friday and Saturday, and things are so cheery. What about Wednesday, man?
Mm-hmm.
What about the water cooler on Wednesday? What are you gonna do? That's with all practices. If you're pissed off about the way things are in the United States or in the world, going and protesting is very important, and it's a strong message to send. What are you going to do on Wednesday?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do when the riots are over? It's a slow burn. It's not sexy. It's not glorious. But if you continue at it, you get better and better. And one day you're either a black belt, or you're publishing psychedelic research, or you're decriminalizing these things. These things don't happen in one day. None of these things do. It's like working out. You don't go work out and, dang, I don't have a six pack. This is bullshit. I'm done. I'm not doing this.
Mm-hmm.
So jiu-jitsu gives you that mindset and that application to do that. And that's very important for psychedelics, is the integration aspect. What are you doing on Wednesday, man? What are you doing outside of this life transformative? Has it transformed your life? What are you doing? And for me, I was lucky enough to find jiu-jitsu, and that's been my integration, more so than yoga. And I should meditate more, man. I should do a lot of things more, but right now jiu-jitsu is what I do more of.
Yeah. My hope and one of my dreams is to integrate psychedelic research and jiu-jitsu research. Eventually, when LSD research opens back up a little bit more, I already have, 10 or 12 black belts that I'm friends with who are very interested in taking part in, a study where we have people on microdoses and measure performance issues and cognitive things and stressors and all these things, cortisol levels in the blood. It would be great to marry those two. So I want to be respectful of your time. And the last question I want to ask you is sort of, so this podcast for me is a way for me to be of service, to provide a platform. The way I view consciousness and all these individual nodes that we are, is that we're all part of this bigger picture, and we all have a little puzzle piece to this 8.5 billion piece puzzle, where if we just have our one piece, sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes the picture doesn't emerge. But if we can have a platform like this podcast to start combining pieces and bringing them to the table, then eventually this bigger picture is going to emerge, and it's something that we're all going to be able to connect with, because we all share this experience of consciousness, even though it's subjective differences between them. So my last question for you is, for the listeners, what could you bring to the puzzle? What is your puzzle piece? What is Dell's puzzle piece for humanity? Lessons you've learned, wisdom, anything that you sort of want to contribute to that larger picture?
Yeah, man, that's a tough question, and I'll answer it, and then 20 minutes I want to call you back and change it, right? Because it's such a complicated thing. I want to bring to the table what is in my ability to bring to the table, and I think that I have a unique opportunity to help maybe more conservative type folks understand the powers of psychedelics. And I just want to do the best I can to bring that forth in a palatable, professionally curious way, because I think my piece of the puzzle is, outside of making sure that my children grow up to be healthy, whole, expansive humans that can do big things in the future as well. I would like my piece of the puzzle to be more empathy, and I think that that's going to come through some of the research that we do with Unlimited Sciences. I think that that's going to be the legacy that I leave behind, outside of being on the Decriminalize Denver team and moving forward some cannabis stuff years ago when I was with Charlotte's Web. I want to legitimize options and liberty for people through psychedelics. So hopefully I could do my little part there, and that'll be enough to lay my head to rest at when it's all over and feel good about it. But yeah, that's a tough question, because I want everything for the whole world, and I want people to realize their own individual power and come and help me and help us and be a collective that enjoys this opportunity that we have in this human form, And so whether that's, being shared on the mats or shared in activism or shared in circle or shared in daily interactions, I'd like for us to at least share and start considering each other as a piece of the puzzle, like you say, man. So
I love that. Yeah, every piece matters for sure. We can get this huge puzzle put together, but if a couple of pieces are missing, it's going to frustrate the hell out of us, right?
Yeah.
So thank you for those words of wisdom, and thanks again for coming on the show, Dale. I really appreciate it. It's been a true pleasure to get to know you a little bit better. I really look forward to coming down to your hurt yurt and laying some hurt on you guys and getting some hurt laid on me. And we're going to have to get you guys in some gis, because I know you guys at 10th Planet don't do too much gi work. I'm telling you, though, once you put on a gi, man, you got thousands and thousands of more options for all sorts of cool stuff. So maybe I can come down. Yeah, maybe I can come down there and show you guys some fun ninja stuff that I've been working on. But
do you roll without a gi? Ever?
Oh yeah, I've rolled and competed both gi and no gi. I'm a professional with the Fight to Win organization here in Colorado, and I've done no gi and gi matches for them. But also gotten some gold medals in both.
I love it. Yep, I'm gonna love to learn. So you bring it, and I'll learn. But probably be saying, hey, let's take that off. Let's roll real fast, real quick. But sure. I welcome you anytime, brother. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me and having me on.
All right, thanks, Dale. Conversations with the Mind podcast is sponsored by mindops.com. You can find us at www.mind-ops.com. We're an eclectic counseling company providing mental health and mental performance services to individuals, small and large groups, teams, businesses, military, through face-to-face sessions or at a distance using phone or confidential video chat apps. We bring a unique Buddhist Western lens and specialize in general psychotherapy for all mental difficulties, sport and performance psychology for performance enhancement, addiction counseling for any maladaptive or destructive habits, and psychedelic integration therapy to make the most from your visionary medicine work. We are available as well for corporate workshops to address the needs of your employees' wellness.